And joining us now on the debate for the full hour tonight, on the line from Hamilton, Ontario, representing the views from the Hamilton-Niagara region, Peter Graefe, Professor of Political Science at McMaster University in the Hammer. And with us here in studio from Central Ontario, Jim Struthers, Professor of Canadian Studies at Trent University in Peterborough. From Southwestern Ontario, Jeffrey Stevens, Political Science Professor at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo. For the Northern Perspective, Laure Paquette, Political Science Professor from Lakehead University in Thunder Bay. And from Eastern Ontario, Kate Hartfield, Deputy Editorial Page Editor at the Ottawa Citizen. Good to have everybody around our actual and virtual table. Peter, nice to have you on the line from the Hammer. Before we kind of understand what this election is about and what the big issues are, there is, of course, no one single Ontario economy because it's different everywhere you go. So let's just get a better understanding. Peter, we'll start with you, with how the economy is performing in all of your respective areas of the province. How are things in Hamilton-Niagara these days?
Well, I think things have actually picked up nicely since the recession. I think the bigger issue is that we've had a sort of 6 to 8 year manufacturing crisis. And while some advanced manufacturing is coming back, there's a real question about, the quality of jobs and the number of jobs. So some places like Hamilton are doing better, but even there, are the new jobs being made going to be the ones that create and recreate that middle-class lifestyle that was the hallmark of manufacturing Ontario?
Laure Paquette, how about the North?
Well, resource exploitation collapsed, and we had a prolonged 20-year crisis. Now it's picking up again because of the Ring of Fire. And everybody's betting on that.
Everybody's betting on the Ring of Fire.
Oh, yes.
You want to take 30 seconds, remind everybody what that is?
Ring of Fire, there was some chromite minerals discovered in well north of Thunder Bay, and the staging areas as well as the processing areas, everybody hopes, are going to be in the region of the north.
And what it means is jobs, money, tax revenues, etc.
The Thunder Bay housing market is overheated right now. It's a big shock.
Huh. Okay. Jim, how about for you?
Well, Central Ontario, Steve, is going through some difficult adjustment times right now. Where I'm from, Peterborough, it's got the highest unemployment rate in Ontario, one of the highest in the country for a census metropolitan area, about 11.2%. Barrie, which normally is a dynamic economy, is up about 9%. Belleville, around 9.3%. So demographically, there's some problems with aging and outmigration, and problems with youth unemployment too. So it's going through a rough period.
Jeffrey.
Well, in my part of the province, the collapse of a lot of the manufacturing sector has hurt badly. Auto parts in particular, through the Kitchener-Waterloo area and beyond. The closing this week of the Ford plant in Talbotville, down St. Catharines area, has hurt badly. On the other hand, the economy was beginning to pick up generally in the area. In the Kitchener-Waterloo area, the particular concern about the high-tech sector, which has been fast growth, made Kitchener-Waterloo just about the fastest growing part of Ontario. And with the high-tech sector maybe languishing now, a lot of concern about the future of research in motion, which is the biggest and most prestigious employer in that sector in that area. Everybody's sort of a bit on tenterhooks.
The stock price is not where they want it, is it?
No, it's not, and neither is the employment. They've been laying off people, and it comes up at all the political meetings. There's not a whole lot of difference among the parties in the prescription for this problem, but everybody says, yes, we are concerned.
Kate, what's the view from Eastern Ontario?
Well, Ottawa tends to be a little bit insulated because of the presence of the federal public service. But as Jeffrey was saying about the Kitchener-Waterloo situation, it's very similar in Ottawa with high-tech that, there's always a question about access to capital and small to medium enterprise and whether they can come out of the bit of the slump that they've been in.
There is, we have to say this right off the top. We're a week, a little more than a week into this election campaign, and there's a long way to go. But still, there are some issues, and Peter, to you first on this, there are some issues that have started to gain some traction already, depending on where you are in Ontario. Hamilton-Niagara, is there anything that has sort of galvanized or interested the public that you can tell so far?
Well, I think in many ways I've been following the provincial campaign. Perhaps down in the Niagara region, there's been a bit more of an emphasis on healthcare because there's been some issues around the local health integration network, the closing of emergency rooms in a couple of communities, and the centralization of those services in St. Catharines, as well as the taking into provincial trusteeship of the Niagara health system following a C. diff breakout. So that's been an issue that's had a bit more play in the debates there, but otherwise it's been fairly closely tracking the leaders' campaigns.
You know, it is interesting, Peter. That's been a huge issue, the whole, the issue in the Niagara Health Centre. But I'm not sure it's percolated to other parts of the province. And in fact, even at Queen's, I know people down there have said they've had a lot of trouble getting Queen's Park to pay attention to what's gone on down there. They finally went in and took over the hospital. But has that been a big issue in the campaign so far?
I mean, I think it's been raised. Whether it's going to be an issue that people make decisions on is another matter, because again, the parties that are there don't necessarily have very specific answers to the concerns in that community. And so whether, it's Hudak's decision to get rid of the LHINs or some of Horvath's promises around putting more money into emergency rooms, it's not clear how that's really going to affect things on the ground in those communities, say, that have lost an emergency room. Is one going to come back? And without that, then it's hard to really make that into a strong political issue.
Jim, any issue in particular that's grabbed people so far?
Well, healthcare is certainly an issue in Peterborough and in Central Ontario generally. Demographically, it's a part of Ontario that has an older age profile. We're about now at 18% of the population 65 and over. That's where the rest of Ontario is going to be at about another 10 years. So issues around seniors care, home care, supportive housing, and also hospital utilization are big in Peterborough. We just opened a new regional health unit, a brand new hospital in 2008. It's already suffering under about a $23 million deficit. There's been layoffs of about 150 nurses over the last year and a half to try to deal with the deficit crunch. That's got a lot of people upset, especially in the nursing profession. And there's delays in terms of access to home care and chronic care. So health is an issue in this election.
How about in the east? I know you got a couple of new MRI machines in Eastern Ontario there. Does that sound like it's playing in the government's favor as a result?
Well, healthcare is always an issue, but honestly, it hasn't really been the defining issue or even one of the top issues so far in Eastern Ontario, I would say. I think some of that might be because our local health integration network is pretty popular. It's run by some respected people, and it seems to be doing pretty well. So we've been a little bit baffled there, I think, by the controversy over that. But I think if there's any issue that's galvanized the population a little bit, it's probably green energy.
Green energy, in what respect?
Well, I think because there are some competing interests for the population that, nobody likes to pay high hydro bills, so parties that come in and talk about that, obviously there's a lot of traction there. But at the same time, in rural Eastern Ontario, many people are benefiting from the feed-in tariff renewable energy programs, and so there's a little bit of a delicate balance there that the Tories in particular have to pay attention to, because they've got to make sure that people know their contracts are going to be honored and that there's not going to be a huge tearing up of that program.
Right. I know when we took this program to Eastern Ontario, we did, I guess, our agenda camp out of City Hall. The number one issue by far was energy. People were most concerned about prices and a stable, secure green supply. So that sums up nicely in what you just said. Has there been an issue, Jeffrey, a number one issue that people are talking about in your region?
Well, it's a bit as Peter said. I mean, there are issues out there, but there's no sense that any one particular party has a prescription for those problems. So it tends to come out at meetings more as sort of general complaints than support for any particular policy initiative. But certainly healthcare is right up there, particularly hospital waiting times, which bothers people. Job creation. Provincial debt to a degree.
Can I pick up on wait times?
Yeah.
Because the Liberals think they've got a good story to tell on wait times.
And they tell it, and they do tell it. And the Conservatives attack them relentlessly for it. So every meeting it becomes a subject of some debate and disagreement, and nobody has the answer on that one. But no, you're quite right. Gasoline prices, high hydro rates. Mr. McGuinty is constantly being accused of jacking up the hydro rates by 84% or whatever it is that the opposition parties want to contend. But those would probably be the main thing. There's a sense I get out there that people are not really tuned in, by and large, in public.
Too early still.
A little too early, and I think there's a fatigue that has set in the province. You've had municipal elections, some of them quite controversial, like the one in Toronto last fall. You've had a federal election campaign. You've had the NDP phenomenon, and then the Jack Layton death, and all that wrung a lot of people out. People now are they're not just plugged back into politics. They're turning around saying, "What? Another election? Oh, And there's this bit of a sense that, oh, here we go again if we have to. I'm afraid it's going to be a low turnout.
I got news for them. They got 23 days to get over it. Well, we are going to have the vote regardless.
But they may not get over it.
They may not get over it. Okay. Can I ask you about an issue that seems to have percolated just literally in the last 24 to 48 hours, and that is this kind of attempt to stage a leaders' debate in Northern Ontario focused exclusively on northern issues. What's happening with that?
Well, the Association of the Northwestern Municipalities invited the three leaders, and Tim Hudak and Andrea Horvath said yes. And yesterday, McGuinty, who was actually in Thunder Bay when he said this, announced this, is not going to be at this debate. It's going to be held on the 23rd, $100 a head to get in.
$100 a ticket
yeah,
to
it's
get in?
part of a conference. You have to register. I just sprang $285, me and a couple of my friends.
Okay.
So it hit Thunder Bay and hit the north like a thunderclap, because the background in the north is always that the government of Ontario governs for the GTA. It doesn't matter that there's Ottawa and the Niagara and Hamilton. It's all about the GTA. So this really reinforces that notion, and the Liberals are now considered to be in trouble. In Thunder Bay Atikokan, it was a very narrow victory, 36 votes, 50 on recount. And the vote has been trending to the left, that is to the NDP, even though we still had some Liberals return last election. So, you know, our minister in Thunder Bay, Michael Gravel, did what he had to and said nice things about, we're going to cover these issues in the main debate. You're going to be there. You tell me how much airtime the northern issues are going to get.
That depends on what questions the consortium picks, and we don't know that yet. But
Exactly.
if the Premier doesn't show up, do they still have the debate anyway?
Oh, yes.
They will go ahead. Will they put an empty chair out there?
Andrea has asked for it. It's up to the organizers. I don't think it's going to make much difference if there is one or not. This is what everybody's going to be talking about.
Is the Green Party being invited to participate?
Not to my knowledge.
Really? Not even for the Northern debate, the Greens don't get in?
Yeah, that's right, and nor does the Northern Heritage Party, which has three candidates now. This is a regional, to be polite, or secessionist, to be impolite, party. They ran a few candidates last time. They've got fewer this time. They have no chance of being elected in the North.
Can I just ask you, Jeffrey, to put your old, what were you, managing editor of the Globe Mail once upon a time?
Yep.
Put that hat on and ask you to do kind of the political analysis of a party leader announcing his Northern Ontario platform just north of Toronto and then avoiding the Northern leaders' debate when the other two have decided to show up. How does that play?
It plays very badly, and his absence will be much noticed. I would say that it's not political suicide, but it's politically foolish to do. He obviously has concluded that there are no seats to be gained by showing up. What he's going to do at that time, I don't know. I don't think he said where he's going to be at that time. I mean, there's a certain selective absence from some of these debates and some of the all-candidate meetings, and the Conservatives in particular in my region have been avoiding some of the all-candidates meetings, particularly if they're on themes that the Conservatives are not comfortable with. Women's issues, for example, and other social issues, they tend to stay away from that sort of stuff. But for a leader, particularly a premier, to stay away from a debate of other leaders is very, very odd.
Is there a bit of a, Peter, a thin edge of the wedge here? If I go to a Northern Ontario debate, then Eastern Ontario is going to want one, Southwestern Ontario. The tradition is one leader's debate. So is McGuinty in trouble on this by balking at going to the Northern debate?
Yeah, to the extent that there's a regional sentiment that can be mobilized around that, certainly he will pay a price. But ultimately, I think the other leaders know that they can't keep agreeing to all these special debates. I mean, it serves parties that are running second and third to have as many debates as possible of this sort, especially if it discredits the absent government. But I think they also know that they have to put a limit on that, or every single interest, whether it's geographic or otherwise, will expect them to show up for their own debates and be disappointed when they don't. So it's a dangerous game, too, for Horvath and Hudak, because they please the North, but they may displease the next group that says, well, you spoke up North, so why aren't you going to speak at our women's debate or at our our debate of the Francophonie?
Understood. I think just for the record, this all got started when Andrea Horvath wrote a letter to the other two leaders saying, or maybe the other three, I'm not sure if she included the Greens, saying, let's have three debates and let's have one up north, and I guess Tim Hudak took her up on it. Kate, let's get into some discussion about what has so far, admittedly early days, been the hot button issue of the campaign. We did a full program on it last night, and that is this new program the Liberals are putting forward for quote unquote new immigrants, what the Conservatives at one time were calling foreign workers. How's that playing in the East?
I think it's played there pretty well as it's played everywhere else. I would say that there was plenty to criticize in the policy, but the PCs took a very strange way of doing it and put their foots in their mouths many times over with this foreign workers nonsense and not getting the policy right when they were criticizing it. And although some of the candidates, even today and yesterday that I've seen, we're still using the phrase foreign workers, I think the instructions probably are slow trickling down from the top that that's no longer to be used. But I think in general the issue is probably on the wane, and I think everything that could have been said about it has probably been said.
Has been said.
Yeah.
Jim, how about in Peterborough?
Yeah, it got off to a fast start when the local Conservative candidate, Ellen Wilson, said that I don't get why we're not giving jobs to our people. And that created a backlash not only in Peterborough in terms of the media, but outside of Peterborough. Since then, I would agree with Kate, the issues probably died off, and local electorates turning to other things.
Peter, the candidate for the Conservatives in Burlington asked rhetorically, since when were we for immigrants, talking about the Conservative Party. That was then. Today, is this still an issue that you can tell in the Hamilton-Niagara region?
Well, I think it should be, because it's a region that needs to attract and retain skilled immigrants, and I think this is an example of how our political parties have failed us in this election, where there's an important issue there for a lot of areas of the province which need to retain and attract those immigrants, but rather than having a question about what policies are there, we sort of fall into this gotcha politics.
How about in the north?
Nobody's been talking about that issue very much at all. You have to remember that there's a lot of people who are immigrants in the Northwest, first-generation immigrants, so this whole idea that somebody should help, somebody should be helped to hire them is kind of anathema. Everybody's talking about the hydro bills, both for their homes and for companies. That's industries. That's what people are talking about.
Really? So this didn't make a huge, because I'll tell you, the 60-point type headlines that we've seen down here, this has been a huge issue in the South.
I agree. I'm a little surprised myself, because we've actually seen an influx of more recent immigrants, not from Europe, into the region in recent years, but it's not an issue that's gotten any traction at all. Nobody's talking about it.
How about in the Southwest, Jeffrey?
It's an issue which has created a fair bit of controversy. There's a sense that it reflects a certain intolerance on the part of the Conservatives. It certainly plays to the Liberals' advantage, not to the Conservatives. I'm not sure it's entirely dead yet. I was at a meeting the other day, and the Conservative candidate went into a bit of an attack on foreign students, that the provincial government is favoring foreign students by whatever grants it gives to foreign students, is discriminating against Ontario students by favoring foreign students. That plays well to some Conservatives. And part of the country that I'm in, there are a number of fairly right-wing Conservatives, and they do very well federally, and they hold some seats provincially as well.
Maybe this is a good time to get into some conversation about the difference between the reality of your life if you live in the Greater Toronto Area, take the subway, take the bus, or if you don't. And Jim, let's start with you on this one. We live in the United Nations if you live in the capital city of this province. You cannot help but note that half the people who live in the city of Toronto weren't born in the city of Toronto. This place looks different. But that is not the reality in places outside Toronto. Is that maybe why this issue seems to be resonating big time in the 416 and 905, but maybe not in points beyond as much?
That's quite possible. If you're looking at central Ontario, it's really old Ontario to a certain extent, in the sense that it's traditional British, Anglo, English-speaking. In Peterborough, about 3% of the population are visible minorities, and Barrie about 6% because it's closer to Toronto. Belleville about 3%. So you're really looking at a region where it will play into the politics of making it more difficult to attract new immigrants. And so to that extent, people are worried about the issue, because that's an issue we are very concerned about. We want to attract young people, we want to attract new workers, we want to attract new investment. But in terms of the overall demographic composition of central Ontario, it is part of the province that in many respects resembles Ontario in the 1950s and 60s more than it does Toronto or the GTA in 2011.
Peter, could you weigh in on that? Because certainly Hamilton is more multicultural than, say, Peterborough or Belleville, but it's not Toronto.
Yeah, but I think it remains that for a lot of people, they see this as a small program and maybe not really related to the struggles they're having in terms of the labor market. I don't think they get the sense that people are coming and taking jobs, which is what Hudak was really trying to mobilize, I think, with this. I think they're more concerned about, well, where are the jobs going to come from, and where are the jobs that are going to pay a wage that will allow you to continue to afford the increased cost of living, right? So there's, I think, a bunch of people in the region who are rather ripe to support the Hudak's vision, in the sense that their wages have stagnated. It's not clear how they're going to get ahead, even though they're working harder. But the scapegoat that Hudak chose, I don't think, is credible to them, and for that reason, you know, it may mobilize a few people in one way, it may make other people a bit disgusted with Tim Hudak on the other, but it hasn't really been a major driver in terms of getting people to catch on to this election and get excited with it in the way that, you know, Jeffrey Stevens says maybe we need to.
Kate, does Ottawa, an area, see itself as more of quote-unquote new Ontario or older Ontario?
It's hard to say. I think Eastern Ontario is an interesting region because it's urban and rural, and I think that there's a divide there, certainly. But even there, I think what this is all about is Hudak's attempt to portray his party as the party of regular folks. But I think that's very dicey in Ontario anywhere, trying to decide who regular folks are and what they want. As Jim was saying, I think it's a little more complicated because even if you're in an area that is, you know, more the traditional demographic, they have concerns about an aging society, and they may not have the same concerns that Hudak thinks they do.
Laura, are there two Ontarios on this one?
There's at least two Ontarios on this one. In the north, because of the immigration in part from the Francophones into northeastern Ontario, which is 90% Francophone, and then West European, East European immigrants into the northwest. I mean, there are more native Italian speakers in Thunder Bay than there are Francophones in Thunder Bay, more Finnish speakers than there are Francophones. So it's quite a different picture. And these people were, there was a lot of immigration programs because the resource exploitation industries were looking for laborers. And so we're looking at a very different picture from the sort of wide spectrum of people flooding into the GTA and the consequences that has. So, you know, the issues such as foreign workers, well, it's not that big a deal, but what is a very big deal is there's an aging population in the north, it's depopulating, the young people are leaving, and they may well be some of the people who are coming into the big southern cities.
Okay, let me go around the, again, literal and metaphorical table here and talk about the leaders themselves and how they're doing. And Peter, I want to start with you because in your region that you're here representing today, two of the leaders are from there. You've got Andrea Horwath, who's right in downtown Hamilton, and then you've got Tim Hudak from the Conservatives, who's just sort of, I guess, on the outskirts of Hamilton and moving further towards the Niagara region. Can you tell, given that two leaders have their bases in this same region, how that plays out in terms of how people relate to politics, how they think about politics, the strengths of the candidates there, all of that?
Well, I think it's actually rather remarkable how small their coattails are. I mean, looking in this election, it's not as if having the possibility, for instance, to elect the first premier from the Niagara region is really moving a lot of voters in Niagara Falls or Welland or St. Catharines. It's not clear that there's going to be many gains there for Tim Hudak. Similarly in Hamilton, Andrea Horwath, a former municipal councillor, is well loved and well liked, but it's not even sure if that's going to be enough to put her over the top on Hamilton Mountain, a seat that the NDP holds federally. So I think there's an interest in these leaders because they come from the community. But ultimately, I don't think people are enough plugged into politics that they develop a kind of homegrown nationalism supporting one or the other. And so in that sense, I think one interesting thing is how divorced the leader is from their community, in a sense. They may be loved in their riding, they may be seen provincially, but between the two, it's not like they have a very strong geographic pull.
Jeffrey, let me get you to follow up on that, because I guess, you know, once upon a time in the day, if you were a premier representing a certain city or a leader representing a certain city, there were coattail effects. You could, you know, assume that you'd win a lot of the neighboring ridings as well. Peter seems to think that's not the case. How come?
Well, I think he's right. I don't think it is the case anymore, but it certainly was in the day. I mean, the day when John Robarts had coattails in the London area, Bill Davis in the Brampton area, and so on. But these days, no. I mean, I think the province has changed. The population is much more cosmopolitan. People move around an awful lot more. I saw a statistic a while back that 40% of the people in the center of Toronto change residences every year. I mean, that sort of thing. It just, people aren't there where they used to be. They don't vote the way their parents used to vote. And they don't vote because the leader happens to come from their community. I don't think it really helps at all. And you saw that with John Tory in the last election. He had no coattails anywhere, even whatever riding he was running in, and I don't think there is this time.
Now, having said that, you've got the premier in your backyard.
We do.
Do
yes.
people in Ottawa, I mean, Ottawa's a federal town, obviously, it's not a provincial town. Do people care that the Premier represents their part of the province?
I don't think there's a really a conscious conversation about it, but I think if anything, it might even represent a bit of a liability because there's a sense perhaps that he takes it for granted. Ottawa South is a McGuinty family riding and has been for a very long time, and both federally and provincially now.
Just explain that.
That David McGuinty, his brother, yeah, is a federal MP for the same riding, and of course Dalton McGuinty sort of inherited the riding from his father. So the sense, I think, is that, you know, we don't maybe see a lot of him, that he isn't really an advocate for Ottawa in the way that he could be. And so I think, if anything, I don't think in Ottawa South, but maybe in the larger region, there might be, it might contribute to the idea that the Liberals have a sense of entitlement. Now,
is that a fair rap that Dalton McGuinty doesn't bring home for the Ottawa region as much as, say, John Robarts would have for London or Bill Davis would have for the GTA? Is that fair to say?
I don't know if it's fair or not. I mean, certainly Jim Watson, our mayor, who's a former Liberal cabinet minister, might disagree. I think there are certainly some strong relationships and some strong players in the region, and so I'm not sure whether it's a fair argument and what people really expect. But I think there's a little bit of that sense there.
Okay, let's talk jobs. I know the polls tell us that healthcare is the #1 concern that everybody has. We've talked healthcare, but jobs are way up on the radar screen as well. And Laura, we're going to go to you first on this. Jobs in Northern Ontario is a perpetual issue, and I want to know whether or not the people in the North that you've been in touch with feel that any of the parties so far are advancing ideas that they think will actually make a dent in the unemployment problems of the North.
The jobs are connected to the way that the industries in the North are supported, and there's this perpetual feeling that the industries in other larger population bases are more favored by the government in Toronto. And so it's basically a reverse, it's a disgruntlement with the programs being proposed. The North has wanted for a long time preferential hydro rates for the forestry industry.
They got that in the last budget.
They got that, but they compare that to the millions of dollars being poured into manufacturing in other parts of the province, and they're not happy.
So in other words, the province will buy they'll buy a couple of car companies to save jobs in the South, but not in the North.
That's correct. And just like with healthcare, if you're in Toronto and you have to come up to Thunder Bay, which does happen to get cancer treatment, all your expenses are refunded by the province, but it's not the same if we have to go to Toronto or Hamilton or Winnipeg for heart surgery or other types of procedures.
Is that right? Your travel's not subsidized?
It's subsidized, but it's not to the same extent as people coming up from the South to come to the cancer care center in Thunder Bay.
So, and so far, nothing that you've heard so far in the campaign has dealt with these issues adequately.
That was the pet project of Michael Gravel. He did a lot of work along those lines, but it's not. If they've managed to equalize it, people haven't noticed it. So this is a problem.
Jeffrey, how about job? I know the assumption is that in the innovation triangle, the unemployment rate is very low, and you don't need the help there as other parts of the province do. But how's it all playing out so far?
Well, I think that particular triangle has done very well by the provincial government in terms of support for the high-tech industries, and that's been very much a prestige thing which the province has done. Federal government has put a lot of money in as well. We always opening new institutions and this sort of stuff in the region. People are not convinced that the governments, either federal or provincial, have done such a good job in dealing with the laid-off and unemployed manufacturing workers who don't have those skills, who are not getting retrained. You can't take somebody who worked making steering wheels for cars and turn them into a computer specialist overnight. And there's a bit of a sense that a lot of these jobs have disappeared. They're pretty good paying, well-paying jobs, and there's nothing there for some of these people. So there is that concern, but by and large, the area is pretty well taken care of by governments, which is maybe one reason why interest in the election is not higher. I mean, people are reasonably content.
Is it a tale of two cities, though? I know Waterloo, innovation, Balsillie, Lazaridis, they've got so much going on there. Kitchener, right across the road, not the same thing.
Yep.
Definitely, hit hard in terms of manufacturing.
Well, the new Centre for International Governance just opening this week in Waterloo. It's just all the money that's gone in for some of these things. Yeah, Kitchener's the lunch pail town. Waterloo is the white collar town. It's the university town. It's the insurance company town, and Kitchener sort of makes do with a lot of blue collar jobs in failing businesses. And so there is a sense that way. But Kitchener's got more people, but Waterloo's got more prosperity.
Jim, you told us earlier about Peterborough and Barrie, and I have the numbers here. The unemployment rate in Peterborough is 11.2%. That is well above the provincial average.
Well, 3 points.
3 points. And in Barrie, it's 9.5%, which is still north of the average. Have you heard anything in the campaign so far about job creation that you think would alleviate any of the problems that are going on in central Ontario?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion on that issue, and it takes basically 2 different or 3 different forms. One is transportation. I think a real fear of people in central Ontario, in all those communities, is a sense of increasingly being left out of the core as industry and investment become more concentrated in the GTA and the technology triangle. So they want to be part of that triangle, they want to be plugged into it. So increasing transportation access to those key regions is a key issue. In Barrie, it takes the form of a 5th GO train and all 7-day-a-week service as a way of plugging into Toronto.
So the Liberals made that promise, and people like that.
People like that, and it's not insignificant that the 3 key cities in the central Ontario, Barrie, Peterborough, and Belleville, are the only 3 ridings held by Liberals. So the urban core of central Ontario is Liberal. The rest of the area, it's 8 Progressive Conservatives. So there's a kind of an urban-rural divide on this. But also, people living in these cities and also in rural areas want to see decentralization, in the sense they want to have services and job opportunities transferred to the region. So, for example, in Barrie, they're talking about and getting excited about possibly the prospect of a new university. McGuinty mentioned there might be 3 new universities if the government's re-elected. Barrie thinks they've got a good shot at getting one of those. In Lindsay, the Liberal candidate's talking about the possibility of a cancer on-site treatment in Lindsay. Peterborough, of course, we want expansion in the university sector, but we also want the perpetual train that's always been promised to us to replace the one that was taken away in 1990. Every federal and provincial election, the so-called mystery train comes back. It's back again in the last federal election.
Yeah, didn't Jim Flaherty promise that a couple of elections ago?
Jim Flaherty promised $115 million to upgrade the track. And
anything happened yet on that?
So far, we're waiting, and we've always been waiting. Maybe something will come of it. We're also waiting for the extension of the 407 toll highway, which was promised to be completed by 2013. It's now been extended out to 2020. So those kinds of transportation improvements, which are expensive but ultimately extremely important for job creation, getting jobs and people to Peterborough and Belleville and Barrie, but also making it easier for people living in those communities to get to the GTA for employment, because there's a lot of toing and froing in this kind of job market.
People commute a long way now, don't they? From Peterborough to Toronto, or from Belleville to Toronto?
Peterborough to Oshawa, we have a lot of people working the Autoplex. A lot of people commuting on the bus, and they go the bus to Toronto. A lot of people from Barrie, about 27% of the workforce is commuting to Toronto, down the 400. And in Barrie, that issue is one of urban congestion. They feel investing in public transit is absolutely critical to break up the gridlock in downtown Barrie, as all those people are trying to get in and out of the city in their cars. So it's not just an energy issue, it's a job issue, it's a service issue.
Lifestyle issue too, I guess, at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Peter, let's check in with Hamilton Niagara here, and I guess again we're talking a tale of 2 cities. The unemployment rate in Hamilton is actually lower than Toronto's, lower than the provincial average, but Niagara region's lost a lot of jobs lately. So what have you heard on the job front so far in this campaign that may be resonating with the electorate?
Well, I mean, I think in Hamilton, jobs have gone reasonably well. The issue there is probably more pensions for people who got thrown out of manufacturing jobs, and it's not clear that their pensions are going to be there. In the rest of the region, there's a lot of concern about jobs. Unlike, say, in Windsor, where there's a bit of a debate around the Samsung deal and whether you can see a future with that deal of a kind of structuring investment in green energy versus lower taxes. We haven't really seen that debate in the Niagara region so much. I think maybe in part because none of the parties have a very compelling industrial strategy. Despite a manufacturing sector which kind of muddles along but seems to need a bit of leadership, a bit of direction in terms of where Ontario is going. But if we read the party platforms, there's not much in them. I mean, the Liberals probably have the most in touting this kind of Samsung deal and a transition to a green economy. But for the NDP and for the Conservatives, it's either a matter of tax credits for creating jobs or lower taxes. But it's not clear that that's enough really to structure the big investments that you require to retool a manufacturing sector for a new set of challenges. Because it's not as if manufacturing is done in Ontario. It may employ fewer people, but it really does need a bit more direction, and we haven't seen that. And so I think that maybe leaves people in the region feeling a bit insecure, but not necessarily knowing which way to go. The parties aren't really offering a vision about how we might get to a different kind of manufacturing future.
Kate, jobs in Eastern Ontario. What are you hearing?
Well, I think that in Eastern Ontario, the Tories' message is actually playing pretty well. And their message is, you know, sure, there are some things we can do, but governments don't create jobs. The private sector creates jobs, and the way that they're going to do that is through lower taxes and lower costs for electricity and that kind of thing. And I think that that makes a lot of sense to people, and it's working pretty well across the region. On a riding by riding level, you do see a lot of the you know, candidates from all parties come in and try to, you know, out-promise each other in terms of which business or government department or what have you is going to move in and save everybody. But overall, I think the larger message is a settler one, and I think it's going well for the Tories there.
Let me pick up on the tax cut issue, because, you know, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, we had an election campaign where one candidate, Mike Harris, talked tax cuts, and it was a magic bullet. The polls went like that, you know, almost overnight once his campaign got out there. People really started to read it. Jeffrey, Tim Hudak is promising tax cuts, income tax cuts, hydro tax cuts, tax cuts on your energy bill. How's it playing this time?
I don't think it's playing terribly well. Mike Harris, it worked for him, and I recall in those elections he had these big buses, which were tax fighter buses, and went around the province. I mean, Hudak's main message seems to be not so much the taxes that he can cut and what it'll do as his attack on McGuinty for raising taxes, for promising to lower taxes and raising it. The message gets all caught up in the partisan attack more than in the, you know, the explanation of the policy. And I don't think anybody's really registered exactly what Hudak's policy is or how it would affect them or how it would reduce their taxes if it would. And I think there's a certain skepticism or cynicism of politicians. They'll promise anything, but they're probably not going to deliver anyway.
Tax cuts in the north, how's it playing?
I think that it's getting a lot of traction. Again, not, as you just said, it's not so much that we know about the policy, is the attack ads on McGuinty as a tax ban. That's getting a lot of traction. People, I think, are going to vote with their pocketbooks. That's what they're concerned about. They're worried about the jobs. They're worried about the cost of living. They're worried about the hydro bill. For some reason, the sales tax, the harmonized sales tax, I thought that was going to stick around for a while. That's not been discussed much in the north, as far as I can tell. But those are the sorts of issues that are getting a lot of traction.
Isn't it fascinating how I mean, these issues have really played differently. In British Columbia, they had such a riot about the HST that they eventually got rid of it. They had a plebiscite and got rid of it. Here in Ontario, people have not been, you know, clamoring in the streets by the tens of thousands to get rid of this thing. It's kind of come in with not as much of a ripple anyway. And same thing in Northern Ontario?
I thought that we would hear no end of it when it finally happened, but people are talking about the hydro bills and not about that.
Do you think that the pro-tax cut message is enough in Northern Ontario, which is normally a Tory wasteland in the province? Is it enough to swing a few seats to the Conservatives' way? It was federally.
Well, if you look at the north right now, if the best predictor is actually the Election Prediction Project, and they do content analysis of editorials and letters to the editor and things like that, and they're showing 4 toss-ups, but a 3-way split between the Liberals, the Tories, and the NDP. And remember, we were going into this election with 7 Liberal seats, 1 Tory seat, and 3 NDP seats. So that would be quite
What's the one Tory seat?
1 Tory seat. Who's the incumbent? Norma Miller.
Oh, that's Parry Sound. I barely...
That's not the north, I agree with you, but it's
Tony Clement.
Yeah, that's
precisely. So it's tabulated as being the north, but the people who live in the north are very offended to have Parry Sound.
Well, the people who live in the north don't think Sudbury's the north, so I understand
Well, that's also true,
yes. Yeah, okay. But federally, Sault Ste. Marie went blue, Kenora is now blue. So do people think that that's a possibility provincially as well?
I think what people have noticed more is that in the last provincial election, we had a trending left of the votes. Even though the seats didn't change color, we had reduced majorities for the Liberals and higher votes for the NDP. And people are looking very closely to see if that's going to continue. And unfortunately, I think for the Liberals, I think that's what's going to happen. I think there's going to be more trend towards the NDP. I don't think for example, in Thunder Bay Atikokan, reportedly, the Tory candidate is not worried about the Liberal. Bill Morrow, who won by a skinny majority, he's worried about the NDP getting in. That's the real opponent in the fight.
Okay, in Central Ontario, Conservatives have most of the seats, the Liberals have got a few seats. Has the tax cut message been warmly enough received that maybe those Liberal seats are in jeopardy?
It's hard to say. I think in the Conservative ridings, they're going to probably win those ridings because they've always won those ridings. Right. Whether or not the tax cut issue is going to resonate that much won't probably make much of a difference. In the urban ridings that the Liberals hold, including also the town of Lindsay, Kawartha city of Kawartha, The tax cut message is being a bit complicated by the fact that the service expansion in areas like education and health and infrastructure improvements are also, I think, resonating. So the incumbents have a positive message they can trot out, which is that, look, here's all the money that's been spent in these communities over the last 8 years. Look at what it's done. Look at the jobs that have been created. Look at the services that are created. Do you want to put your schools at risk? Do you want to put your healthcare at risk? Do you want to put your jobs at risk? So that issue, I think, is yet to be decided, but I think it's a bit more complex. I think also the way, getting back to the HST and also probably the energy issue, I think unlike in BC, McGuinty's Liberals were able to provide tax credits, checks in the mail first, and rebates on your hydro bill to smooth over the adjustments to both the energy costs, the electricity costs, and the HST. So I think that was a politically astute move.
And I guess in fairness as well, I mean, Premier Campbell in British Columbia had promised not to do it, then did it. McGuinty didn't promise not to, he hadn't said anything about it. So
but I think
that was different as well.
A lot of Central Ontario too is small business and agricultural and small town. And I think for people in those communities, probably tax cut are a message that they're listening to.
In Eastern Ontario, the tax cut message, McGuinty as the tax man, that message, how's that playing out there?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I think if you look to the future, there's not actually a whole lot of room between the Liberals and the Conservatives and what they're promising to do on taxes and fiscally in general. So yeah, a lot of it is relying on the Conservatives and the NDP looking to the past and saying, you know, here's what McGuinty's done, here's why he's dishonest, here's why, you know, he's proven that he's not a good money manager and he's going to raise your taxes. But I guess it depends on whether people are looking to the past or the future.
Okay. Out of town in Hamilton, Niagara, how's the tax man, tax-cutting message playing?
I mean, I think it has a certain appeal in a period where wages are stagnant. The only raise most people will get is a tax cut. But at the same time, I think they've seen enough of these to kind of see some gimmickry in it. I think perhaps a more interesting way that it's playing here is that, you know, as compared to BC, is that you've got parties both to the left and the right of the Liberals putting forward a certain tax cut message. And so it's not clear, you know, what the Liberals lose to the Conservatives, they don't gain in the NDP stealing some votes from the Conservatives on the tax issue. And so in some ways, I think it's playing as a bit of a wash in this case. You know, if people are going to be turned off McGuinty, it may be more in terms of 8 years of power and people asking questions if it's time for a change as compared to being some sort of issue around the tax man.
Okay, Professor Paquette, here's an opportunity for you as a Northerner to educate those of us who live in the South about something. The North has some very particular issues and particular challenges around it. For example, we don't have anything called the Far South Act. We have a Far North Act in Ontario. The Endangered Species Act is nothing that anybody down here in the South talks about. It's a big deal in Northern Ontario. Can you take a moment and just talk to us about how the particular issues of living in Northern Ontario may be playing out during the course of this campaign?
Well, one of the most dominant issues is the shortage of healthcare professionals that is unique to the North. You try and get even finding a nurse in Geraldton, for example. So that's a really big issue. The hospital in Thunder Bay is not used to capacity all the time because there's actually a shortage of nurses, not just a shortage of physicians, which is fairly broadly based.
This is the Tajma Hospital?
The Thunder Bay Regional Hospital. Yes, the Tajma Hospital.
Tajma Hospital. That is a beautiful building.
Well, smile when you say that. They send me letters to try and pay off
How
their
much
debt.
does that hospital cost? That is
over 200 million somewhere.
Yeah,
huge cost overrun.
Big, beautiful hospital.
Very nice place, and there's shifting sands underneath it, figuratively and literally. So that's one major issue. I think it's a lot of the issues surrounding the environment are very prominent. There's a mindset in the North that, you know, the nature is to be exploited for economic gain. That's starting to shift, but we get policies coming up from Southern Ontario that are not adapted to our needs. And I had to bring up the issue of the bear hunt again, which is an old issue. But have you ever had a mother and 2 cubs in the parking lot of your grocery store? Because we have.
Yeah.
And that was because the population got out of control because of the elimination of this act. Now, one of the major issues is the depopulation, and it's going to get really, really dramatic because, for example, example, the Board of Education outside Thunder Bay, Greenstone, has had in 1 decade a 50% drop in the number of children attending. Guess what that's going to mean for my employer shortly? But that's going to have an impact overall. So those are some of the things that are really important. Locally, there's a huge kerfuffle over a wind farm going in, not going in on the crest of a bunch of hills surrounding Thunder Bay, at the foot of which are very large, very beautiful homes of people who want to live in comfort, but in the country, I guess they don't want to look at a wind farm going in. So all those sorts of, so those are some of the issues that are coming up.
And the issues, one anyway, that is particular to the neck of the woods that you're in, particularly the Innovation Triangle, is public transit. There are big debates about whether to spend hundreds of millions of dollars building LRT lines throughout Cambridge, Preston, Galt, Hespeler, all that area there. Is that playing out at all in this campaign?
Yeah, it certainly plays out in the region. I mean, this is an area which doesn't have any GO trains, for example. It's almost impossible to get in and out of Toronto. It doesn't even have GO buses. If I want to take public transit in from Cambridge, where I live, well, there isn't any, I can take the Greyhound bus. If I want to drive some miles to the Greyhound bus terminal and take it on the schedule that it runs on and then get back in time before the last bus comes, it's really difficult. You have almost no choice except to drive. And a lot of my neighbors are up at 4:30 in the morning driving into Toronto. I mean, it's at that time you can probably get in an hour.
Is that right? Up at 4:30 in the morning?
That's right. But if you're coming home at rush hour, it's 3 hours. You know, so it's a real pain. So yes, transportation is a real issue. The LRT is one option. Then you get a dispute among the 3 cities in my area between Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, and who's going to get what. And Cambridge never seems to get as much as the other 2. And Cambridge is complaining, well, it's not getting LRT, it's going to get some buses instead. And so everybody's moaning about that. I don't think they know who to blame. They don't like what's happening. It's a municipal issue, it's a provincial issue, and it showed up in the federal campaign as well.
Public transit's been huge for the last several years in Ottawa in particular, where to build the lines and whether north, south, east, west, how they want to do it. Has any of that been sort of come to the fore in the campaign yet?
A little bit. I think Ottawans are probably weary of the debate because it's one of these that's been going on forever. And I think there's a perennial philosophical disagreement between some candidates over whether the province should have a say in exactly where their line goes. You know, some candidates are perfectly willing to map it out exactly where they think it should go, and others say, no, we'll just, you know, we might open our wallets, but it's the city's decision. And so there's a little bit of discussion of that. But in general, it hasn't been a huge issue. But I think the bigger issue has been the NDP's gas policies, which I think are not playing all that well in the city because of the effect on transit if more people drive.
So this is the offer by the NDP to take the tax off gas.
Take the tax off gas and also cap it on a weekly basis to make sure it doesn't fluctuate wildly.
Gotcha.
And so I think
Does anybody believe they can really do that?
I don't know, but I think there's a lot of, especially in the urban parts of the region, you know, it seems like a conflicting message that you want people on buses, but at the same time, you know, we're going to make sure the price of gas doesn't go too high.
Gotcha. We've got about 6 minutes left in our discussion here, and I'd like to go around the table and just talk about whether or not any of you have seen so far in this campaign a candidate who has really caught your fancy. There's always, you know, first-timers here. I know, for example, here in the 416, I think we've got 4 ex-journalists, and we actually hope to have them in for a future program. 4 ex-journalists, 5 if you go out to the Hamilton area, who, you know, are pretty good on camera, and as a result have perhaps captured more attention than they otherwise would have. Peter, why don't I go to you first? Anybody in the Hamilton, Niagara area who's running, maybe for the first time, maybe again, who's worth a second look?
I'm afraid I'd have to say no in all likelihood. I mean, certainly, as you mentioned, we have Donna Skelly from the local television station running out in the Ancaster riding.
For the Conservatives.
For the Conservatives, but I mean, for the most part, these are ridings which are fairly strongly held by the existing parties. I mean, certainly in Niagara Falls, the Conservative candidate had his problems with somewhat indiscreet photos being sent out on Twitter, but you know, that's amusing, but not necessarily a reason to be following closely.
And in your region, you have the longest-serving member of the Ontario Legislature, Jim Bradley in St. Catharines, who's going again, who got elected, I think, in 1977 for the first time. And he's going again. Okay, Jim, how about in your neck of the woods?
Well, probably the one that's most high profile would be Leonor Dombrowski, who's been cabinet minister in 3 different portfolios now, education, previously agriculture and environment in the Belleville area.
She's education now.
Yeah, education now. So she's obviously somebody who has been connecting with all in terms of the Green Initiative, across 3 different portfolios, and probably somebody's being groomed for better things if the McGuinty government's successful in the next election.
I talked to her the other day, and she said the only way I win is when Tories vote for me, because it's a conservative area, right?
Right.
So she needs the Premier to run a good province-wide campaign to keep her numbers up.
She sure does.
Yeah. Okay, how about in Eastern Ontario?
Well, the race that everybody's watching is Ottawa-West Nepean, which is John Baird's riding federally, so obviously it's got a conservative bent. And the candidates there, the incumbent is Bob Chiarelli, who's a longtime Liberal and former mayor and very, very well known in the city. And his challenger is Randall Denley, who's a colleague of mine actually at the Ottawa Citizen.
Still?
Well, he's on leave.
Okay.
So he's a long time city columnist and very well known in the city. And he's running for the Conservatives. So that race, I think, could be awfully close, and we've got 2 very strong personalities with a lot of history.
Have you read any of his old columns to see whether or not they have anything nice to say about Tim Hudak?
Well, a lot of people did. That's the first thing people did when he announced his candidacy. And, one of the things I like best about Randall is that he has always been a very independent and even-handed columnist. And, of course, so he did say some things about Hudak that were not entirely, congratulatory early on. And even he said some things about the policies that he's now championing that were a little bit different. So, for example, municipal uploading. Is one of them. And so I think he's going to have to answer for that. Certainly when you're a journalist, your mandate is different than when you're a politician.
Indeed. Jeffrey, anybody caught your fancy?
No, not particularly. In our area, just about everybody who ran before is running again against each other. The big figures in the area are John Malloy, who's the university minister, who was in Kitchener, Waterloo, I guess, no, Kitchener Centre, and then Kitchener-Waterloo is Elizabeth Whitmer, the Conservative. Right. So a big Conservative figure, a big Liberal figure in the area, and the rest of them are basically the same. The one seat, which is particularly interesting, is Cambridge. Jerry Martiniuk has retired finally. He's a man who was there forever as a Conservative member. He's the man who refused to make a seat available to John Tory when John Tory needed a seat. And Jerry Martiniuk said, no, I won't do it. And the reason he wouldn't do it was because Mike Harris eliminated pensions for members of the legislature. And Jerry said, what else am I going to do? I'm 70 years old. I won't have a pension. I'm going to run again. So he ran again. That seat, he's now stepped down, and so that seat is open. And the Liberals are running a very strong candidate in there, going hard at it. And the Conservatives have nominated one of my colleagues, actually, a university professor at Laurier, in that seat, and he might be able to hold it, but the margin's not very big. It's only about 3,000 votes, so we'll see what happens. I'm watching that one, and the other one I'm watching is Kitchener-Conestoga, where
Leanna
Pendergast is in there, and she's in a real dogfight, and I don't know whether she can win that seat or not.
She's Malloy's sister-in-law, too.
And she's running against a man by the name of Michael Harris.
She is. She's running against Mike Harris. That is not the same one, we should hasten that. Also, right down in the southwest, Sandra Pupatello. She's retired, so that seat's open, and who knows, the NDP may have a shot there as well. How about up north?
Well, there's 2 people that I think are admirable. They get the gold star for working hard for their constituency when it's inconvenient, and sometimes the issue is not that prominent. Timmins James Bay Gilles Bisson, NDP, self-made man, oozes sincerity, not that common a thing in politics these days. And in Thunder Bay Superior North, Mike Gravel, who is a minister now but was a loyal soldier for many years. He also works very hard for the constituency. He's going to be wearing the McGuinty record, which is unfortunate. He may not get re-elected. But, it seems to me that what he likes the best out of life is to go to Heimer's Fair.
Are you not going to mention your former university president is also running for the Conservatives up in which riding? Thunder Bay?
Thunder Bay, Atikokan, and well, I call it the Lakehead University Triad because the Tory candidate against Michael Gravel is Anthony LeBlanc, who's on the Board of Governors in the interest of full disclosure of Lakehead University. And then the husband of an employee of Lakehead University is running as the Green candidate in Thunder Bay, Atikokan.
It's so incestuous. Thanks, everybody, for coming in and giving us this really interesting look around the province of Ontario today. Peter Graefe, the political science professor at McMaster University, thanks for being there on the line from the Hammer. And then where are we going next time, Michael? What side of the table? Okay, over on there. Jim Struthers, Canadian Studies professor at Trent University. Kate Hartfield, deputy editorial pages editor at the Ottawa Citizen. Jeffrey Stevens, Wilfrid Laurier University, and with the Record as well. Laure Paquette, associate professor of political science, Lakehead University. We got it all covered. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.